Hello and welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I am Cassandra, your organic beauty, positive mind management, and endocannabinoid mentor. Although today I have to be completely honest, our guest today, I may have to hand off the endocannabinoid mentor to our guest, Emma Chasen, who I would quite easily call the endocannabinoid guru. And before we jump in, I want to just kind of give you some back data on the abundance of wealth of knowledge that Emma carries with her and her company. And so Emma Chasen has a mission to educate people on the science behind cannabis so that they can take charge of their own healing. Emma has a degree in medicinal plant research from Brown, has coordinated clinical oncology trials with the Brown University Oncology Research Group, is formerly the general manager of and director of education for pharma, and was named Portland's Best Bud Tender of 2016. Emma is now a cannabis industry consultant and helps brands develop education, marketing collateral, and educational programs to further elevate their brand presence in such a competitive market. So you can see the wealth of knowledge that Emma carries. I'm extremely honored to have her as a guest on the podcast today. So Miss Emma, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's so great to be here.
Yes, so great to have you. And I can see all your plants in the background.
Yes.
And reminds me I need to water all my plants. You can't see them, but I have abundance too. And so we are together today because we both love plants. We love the knowledge of plants. We love the biology of the body. And it's something that both of you and I could probably geek out on for hours.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, here we are, two women in this industry that has grown surmountably, especially since you started the research in it. I'm sure it's very interesting from your perspective to see all the different spokes of the wheel that are going on right now. But I think for anybody coming into the Awaken Beauty podcast, a lot of them are aware of health and beauty and cannabis at that. But I never want to disguise that there's this innateness that comes out of our own human body. And that when we're talking about cannabis in such an abundant product type industry right now, we have this power within us as far as our endocannabinoids. So I thought maybe we could just start off with what is our endocannabinoid system and just how we create these beautiful little compounds in our body to keep us in homeostasis.
Absolutely.
So I'll let you take it off from there, girl.
Awesome. So you are definitely right that we already have the building blocks inside of ourselves to be able to regulate our body. Cannabis is just a beautiful supplement to that for an incredibly overstressed population. So the endocannabinoid system, it's a really complex system of not only receptors, but also different signaling molecules and enzymatic factors that help to retain homeostasis within the body. So really it's all about balance. It's not an organ system, meaning that most of the systems in our body, their power comes from an organ. The endocannabinoid system doesn't have an organ necessarily associated with it at its core because it interacts with all of the other organ systems. The analogy that I love to use is kind of like the oil to the tin man, that our bodies are really complex machines that run constantly to keep us alive. And so we need a system to be able to kind of lubricate all of those gears. When we arrive in disease states or diseased states, it means that there's a kind of kink in the machine. And so you have to go in and do some fixing. And we have many different systems that do that. One of the main ones is our immune system, right? But then what supports the immune system? And that's where the endocannabinoid system comes in. It directly supports the immune system, but also many of our other physiological symptoms, especially all of the neurological factors in our brain.
Yeah, and that's what I love. I mean, as far as women, we think about our endocrine system and our hormonal health. We've got this industry with our brain health and, cognitive disorders. So what's so beautiful and, with a functional medicine background is we have all these different systems that we focus on, but really the overarching and what you're saying is the endocannabinoid system is really this communication body that regulates even all of those systems. Am I
Yes.
correct? So it's why I wanted to start here is because I think we need to think really big and really broad. And there are so many different interactions and so many communication points that all these different, well, we'll get into it, phytocannabinoids help, but it needs to be done, I think, with strategy and knowledge and research and, giving that over to the consumer. So that's really what you're here to bring to us today. And so, what Ethan Russo or many others will call our endocannabinoid system is our endocannabinoid tone. And what you've already said is we get into these stress states, and obviously we live in a stressful world. I mean, each of us have and perceive stress in different ways to our own life and life experiences. So I think, if we jump into, maybe we can talk about what are endocannabinoids, the two that we have in our body, the 2-AG and the anandamide, and then what's the differentiation between phytocannabinoids and how those two can kind of play a relationship and how they work on like the receptors in the body would be really cool for you to maybe explore for our guests today.
Definitely. So, clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. I'll start there. So that is a syndrome that is hypothesized by Dr. Ethan Russo and supported by many other researchers in the field that everybody is deficient in our endogenous cannabinoids. So we have this ECS, we have this system that phytocannabinoids such as THC and CBD can interact with and play with, but they can only do so because our body already makes cannabinoids that interacts with the ECS. Those two that you mentioned, the two kind of stars are anandamide and 2-AG.
Right.
Anandamide being named the bliss molecule, quote unquote, and then 2-AG being the endocannabinoid that actually has much greater direct receptor action than anandamide. So anandamide really likes to bind to our CB1 receptors in our brain, whereas 2-AG binds to both the CB1 receptors in the brain as well as the CB2 receptors found throughout the body, specifically densely populated on the immune cells.
So could I stop right there?
Sure.
Okay, so there is competitive talk in the research data where does CBD actually bind, or does it just interact and have this kind of communication touch point with the receptors? Because I've heard you explain that there's, and this brings up another topic, THC has to be present for CBD to bind, but if THC isn't present, does CBD actually bind to the receptors, or just does it create this communication power for the body to make its own endocannabinoids? Does that make sense?
Sure. So our endocannabinoids were designed to kind of perfectly bind to these receptors. So I'll start by saying that the phytocannabinoids, specifically the two major ones, THC and CBD, will never bind as effectively as our own endogenous cannabinoids. Actually, they have quite low binding affinity for the endocannabinoid receptors, yet THC still does bind to that main binding site on the CB1 receptor. Now, CBD cannot bind to that main binding site on the CB1 receptor. It binds to a secondary binding site on that CB1 receptor when THC is bound. So when THC is bound, it changes the conformation of that receptor, opens up that secondary binding site, and then acts as what we call an allosteric modulator. So it's binding not to the main orthosteric site, but to a secondary allosteric site, where then it can modulate the signaling pathways that were being signaled by just the THC. And what we see when both THC and CBD are administered in low doses is that CBD can actually help to reduce the psychotropic activity and any side effects from that, such as anxiety, paranoia, memory loss, etc., but amplify the more quote unquote medicinal pathways, anti-inflammatory, analgesic, etc. When we talk about the CB2 receptors, both the phytocannabinoids, THC and CBD, neither of them have high binding affinity for that specific receptor. There is some competitive data coming out that points to CBD's ability to act as an antagonist to that receptor, meaning that it is playing on different, what we call G protein coupled receptors within the membrane and helping to shunt more of the pathways that are coming from the CB2 receptor signaling. But that is still in preliminary data. And I'll say as a kind of disclaimer, we know very little about the endocannabinoid receptor system. We really just started learning about it in the 90s, and we still have a long way to go in terms of fully understanding it.
Yeah, that's great. So then if we were to say that we have these two endocannabinoids in our body, we've got the 2-AG and the anandamide, the bliss molecule. Anandamide, bliss, that's the receptor that can make us feel high. And then the other does not. So if THC were not present in a phytocannabinoid and taken into the body, how does that relationship work then between CBD and the body's receptors when there is zero THC in a product?
So CBD is quite a promiscuous compound, I like to
Ooh,
call it.
promiscuous.
It is. It has a high promiscuity when it comes to the body, and it loves to interact with many different receptor families. So it has direct action on our serotonin receptor system, on our opioidergic, so our opioid system. It has direct action with the smooth muscle in our digestive system. It helps to modulate many different factors, TNF alpha, PPAR, COX-1, COX-2 inhibition, all in relation to inflammation. And so it does not actually need to have direct action on our cannabinoid receptors. Also, a really cool thing that CBD is able to do is that there are certain enzymes that will carry our endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG, to get degraded. And those carrier enzymes are typically produced in the body by stress. So we produce these enzymes when we're stressed. We're all constantly in a stress state for one reason or the other. We didn't answer an email, or we have a million things to do on our to-do list. And so there are a lot of these enzymes in the body that as soon as the endocannabinoids will be made, they will pick them up and carry them to be degraded. And that is partially the reason why, or at least the theory as to why, we are all clinically deficient in our endocannabinoids. The amazing thing about CBD, and even looking at other phytocannabinoids as well, is that CBD and THC maybe can interact with those carrier enzymes in such a way where they are prohibited from carrying the endocannabinoids. And so it allows a natural buildup of the endocannabinoids in our body. And so through that indirect action, CBD can actually support the better functioning of our endocannabinoid system and our endogenous cannabinoids.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's very thorough. So really, I mean, call it a siren, stress signals go off and we create all of these enzymes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
FAAH enzyme, in which basically squanders, is like a Pac-Man, and eats all of our useful endocannabinoids that we have in the body, which keep us in homeostasis and balance and health and our immune function up, et cetera, et cetera. So, if we're not feeding that endocannabinoid system with the nutrients that it needs, we become deficient. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. And it is an important distinction when we talk about the way that CBD indirectly supports the accumulation of endogenous cannabinoids, to say that a lot of the research that we do have is coming from animal models. So we have very few human clinical trials. And so for a while, it was thought that CBD actually inhibited FAAH, that enzyme that degrades the endocannabinoids, because that's true in rats and mice. But then they did it with humans and they said, no, actually CBD doesn't do that in humans. Instead, what it does is it degrades these enzymes that are responsible for carrying the endocannabinoids to FAAH. And so it kind of blocks the seat on the carrier enzyme for the anandamide or 2-AG to hop on, and then go to the FAAH, if that makes sense. And so that also...
So it's more of a block?
Yes, it's a block to the actual car that's taking it to the FAAH. And that's, again, just another example of the way in which we have data that we look to when animals and rats and mice that may not exactly correlate to humans, but that at least gives us a foundational understanding to then do experiments in human clinical trials that further elucidates the actual mechanisms at play in our bodies.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and that would creating that block then allows us to bank, right, our own endocannabinoids to keep us in a healthy state and continue to recycle those to be at the healthiest optimal endocannabinoid tone.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's really, really great. I think it's a really, as you said, we know so little, and there's so many dynamic roles that we're learning. And unfortunately, we've only been to do all these animal studies. It'd be really, really nice if we get some money to flush into the universities, into the systems, in which I know you're very passionate about, getting, the human experience, quote unquote, in flow so we can learn more for its medicinal use. Now, you have a vast, vast, vast background as a bud tender. And you learned quite a lot, and whether it's been on podcasts or written material, you're very, very passionate about educating people and their experience when they're using CBD, CBD and cannabis, combined on different ratios. And just as complex as the body is, we could geek out on that for days. There's this complexity as well as far as consumer made ready products and how they interact with the body. And so we're in Minnesota. We are a non-THC consumable, only in medical arenas can we really work with it. But we know that there's an overabundance of products, and they create all different kinds of experiences. You come from the experiences of people coming in saying, I want to feel X. And that's just how humans shop. So with so little knowledge and so much being shouted in noise, let's just kind of talk about the different areas of experiences people can have with phytocannabinoids that are on the market. So let's just start with the difference between cannabis and hemp.
Yes.
How those two are very different. And then we can get into the nuances with terpenes and chemotypes and all of that kind of stuff.
Perfect. So CBD is having its 15 minutes of fame right now. That's wonderful. It has huge therapeutic potential and is relatively safe and harmless, especially compared to other pharmaceutical alternatives. However, there is quite a lack of consumer education, and there is quite a lot of manipulative marketing when it comes to the differences between hemp and cannabis. So the way that I like to explain it is that hemp is a subspecies of cannabis. Cannabis, that word, signifies the genus underneath the plant family, and then you have species underneath that. Hemp can be considered one of those species. It is defined specifically by its levels of THC, so by its chemotype, the chemical compounds found inside of its matrix. And this was really done by the government. When the government did choose the specific THC percentage for hemp, it was a very arbitrary decision where a committee just said, you know what, 0.3% THC. If the plant is 0.3% THC or under, it can be considered hemp. Now, in cannabis, there is also what I call the drug cultivar cannabis, which a lot of people call marijuana, which signifies a high THC. Basically, anything that is over that 0.3% THC distinction then falls into that drug cultivar zone. And the reason why we have such a split now between hemp and that drug cultivar cannabis is because they took two very different breeding pathways. One was kept in the more legal market, being hemp. It wasn't desired by the black market because it didn't get you high. And so it was cultivated for its primary compounds, its fibers, its proteins, for hemp hearts and hemp seed oil. Its use as a fuel, paper, so many different things, clothing. It was not bred for its secondary compounds, those phytocannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids. The drug cultivar cannabis, because it was kept in the black market, and the black market wanted potency. That's what it wanted. And so it was bred for a high THC concentration. It was also bred for different terpenes, different aromas, flavors. It was either bred for terpenes that were really appealing to black market, or bred for terpenes that wouldn't be detected by drug sniffing dogs. And what you got from this extensive underground breeding is an incredibly hybridized population of this drug cultivar cannabis that now not only includes a THC dominance, but also mixed ratios of THC and CBD, even some CBD dominance, just again with that THC level above 0.3%. We also have, moving into the CBD movement that we're in now, and moving through that, we have something called craft hemp. So a drug cultivar cannabis variety that has been bred specifically for 0.3% THC or under. So it still has that incredible diversity of terpenes. It may have some other minor cannabinoids in there as well, such as CBC and CBG. And so it can be very, very effective, just as effective as you would get a drug cultivar cannabis on the shelf in a legal adult use market.
So in that market then, in that marketplace, as far as creating these different cultivars and these different chemotypes in the plant, what percentage do you see like the craft hemp industry market growing? Because I know here in Minnesota, I think we had like 6 people wanting to farm like 3 or 4 years ago. And we just walked out of a meeting of like over, I don't know, like 450 different farmers wanting to cultivate hemp for hemp use. And I'm not talking about fibers, they're seeing the market, right? So where do you see all these different factions of growers and what they're trying to grow? And, I just feel like so many people have hopped out of the marijuana market because the prices have plummeted. There's so many transactions going on right now. Where do you see that as far as the farming game going on?
Craft hemp is huge, especially in Oregon, where I'm at. It dominates. And right now, Oregon is dominating the craft hemp market nationally as well. I think that it's a huge opportunity for growers, especially ones who have really risked and sacrificed and lost a lot of their livelihood because they did enter into the THC market, and then the market crashed just due to flood of product, and they couldn't support themselves anymore. So they diversified into hemp, which is wonderful for the soil. It has huge phytoremediation potential, meaning that it really cleans up the land. But because of that, it is a bioaccumulator. And so it must be grown with organic practices. Otherwise, it will concentrate any harmful inputs in its tissues, and you won't be producing good medicine from that. Right. Still, with the craft hemp, with these genetics that you're going to source that do have more terpenes, minor cannabinoids, in addition to CBD, you still could also form what they're called pellets that can go into the manufacturing of hemp plastics and clothing and fuel. And so you could further diversify that way. I think that it will be huge. It is huge right now in Oregon. The hemp farmers who did kind of get at the forefront of this movement, got USDA organic certification, and who did source or breed in-house these prized genetics, are seeing huge profits. And when we look at the United States competing not only internally among states, but also on a global scale, China is producing a ton of industrial hemp, but it's being grown in conditions that are really not suitable for good medicine. And so the way that the United States will be able to compete is by going for the more craft model.
Yeah, I find that so oxymoronic as far as China, because here we have this age-old 5,000 plus year old medicine that, they're so focused on ancient medicine and healing the body, and they're just producing lots of gunk. So something you brought up, and I really, really want to get clarity on, because it's a huge confusion factor, and even for myself, because I've been told both, and everything that we formulate with is absolutely 100% certified sun-grown hemp, organic. But in the US, I don't see us having this governing body where we can actually claim a USDA certified hemp product. Am I right or am I wrong on that? Is it just everybody kind of proclaiming this? How does that work?
With the 2018 Farm Bill, it did allow hemp and hemp farmers to participate in USDA programs,
Okay.
including many different tax exempt programs, et cetera. One of those being USDA organic certification. So you can certify at least hemp farms as USDA organic at this point. The FDA is still working out how they want to move forward with the regulation of CBD products. And so I don't believe at this point that it's available for products to be USDA organic certified, though fact check me on that. But I know that for sure
Okay.
hemp farms can at this point.
Okay, so that's really good. So they can belly up, they can pay the price, they can say, come out, inspect us anytime you want throughout the year. We're our USDA organic, in which I think many farms were in the progression of that already, and we're just waiting for that. But to be on the market, it will say organic hemp, but we don't necessarily have them identifying it as USDA certified organic hemp just because of the influx of, is it a nutritional product and a supplement, or is it, there's just all this confusion. So for the consumer to know, they just need to make sure that they're looking into the company that it's certified organic hemp. And if they can't tell you and they can't verify that, then probably just turn around and look for another one.
Yes, and this is huge when it comes to CBD products, especially with CBD's 15 minutes of fame. Companies are really trying to cash in. And unfortunately, there's a lot of manipulative marketing and lack of transparency where companies are trying to sell hemp seed oil, which does not have a measurable concentration of CBD, as this CBD elixir. And that's just plain old not right, in my opinion. And so if you are a consumer who is looking to source CBD, get in touch with the company, ask where they're sourcing their plant material, ask about their formulation practices, ask to see lab results confirming potency as well as pesticide and heavy metal levels. If a company is not stoked to share their information with you and their practices, then move on to another one.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, so a certificate of analysis, a COA, is what you specifically want to ask for. And something I think is really interesting about a COA is that it actually allows the consumer to kind of look behind the curtain a little bit more. Okay. So let's say you have a 500 milligram CBD product, 0.03 THC, and it's a full spectrum. But then when you really get into, I think this is where it can be confusing, into a COA, you maybe have 20% CBD and then very, very small amount of different minor cannabinoids. And so there can be all this different confusion points as far as it gives you some perspective if you look at a COA to really see the different value sets and percentages of CBD compared to the different minor cannabinoids. And which kind of brings me into the next subject is the beauty of the artisan of this whole industry, to me, is what gets me excited. I'm glad that we're kind of seeing this influx of everybody throwing their hat in the ring, because I truly, truly believe those that are able to get validated scientific research behind what they're formulating and starting to combine these different subsets of cannabinoids with different herbals and things of that. You and I had a conversation this week about just these artisan products that are being made and how valuable they can be. Now, we need more research, but stepping from a COA, being able to really see how much value of different cannabinoids are in there, I really, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about kind of what is this next generation of cannabis and CBD products that we're walking into. I know we have all the gummies and we have all of this influx of private label, slap a label on it and go. But I really want to bring our consumer, our listener, because our listener is your listener, get into the next step and phase of where we're going with extractions and artisan products. Can you speak into a little bit of that?
Absolutely. So there is a theory in the scientific community called the ensemble effect or the entourage effect that speaks to all of the compounds in the cannabis matrix's ability to act together synergistically, amplifying each other's properties and actually creating a multiplicative effect, meaning that you add two compounds together and they will actually multiply each other in
Right.
its effects. And herein lies the power of cannabis. This is why cannabis has such high therapeutic potential for so many different ailments because of the diversity of the compounds. And so when we look to formulation practices, especially in the CBD market, since that is what everybody has access to right now, you will see CBD isolate, you will see distillate, you'll also see broad spectrum, and you may even see full spectrum. My preference in formulation is in the broad spectrum or the full spectrum because it means that the company is using extraction methodology that is preserving most of the diverse secondary compounds, allowing the interplay between them. Even in this conversation, when we started talking about THC and CBD, you just need a tiny bit of THC. It won't even make you feel high to then improve CBD's ability to interact with the body, specifically the endocannabinoid receptor system. Terpenes are amazing at helping the body respond to cannabinoids, at priming our receptors for cannabinoids. Some even bind directly to endocannabinoid receptors. And that, I believe, the consumer market is starting to understand that they want to seek that broad spectrum or full spectrum formulation. And then looking even towards the future, especially towards Israel, where they can run human clinical trials with cannabis and the products that are coming out there are products that not only use full spectrum or broad spectrum cannabis extracts, but they also are combining in other supportive botanicals such as turmeric and ashwagandha and ginger and lemon balm and whatever it may be for some specific therapeutic action, which I think is so exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, given my background in medicinal plant research, it's like, yes, this is how we need to be interacting with this plant. This is how it's meant to be.
Totally. I mean, I think back to cannabis and like even women in menopause, and like before we could even script things, and we can only probably, I think that we can go back to 1920 where women were using it for menopausal reasons. It's not new. You know, we just now live in this really incredible information age, and thank you, Israel, because the research that they're doing and they're allowed to do is just incredible. And they are doing a lot of research with women and women's wellness in cannabis. And this is where I get really excited as well. Like I can feel the energy from you, and it's so fun to connect on that woman to woman, and just the mind expansion that we can really do and continue the science in getting people results faster and safer. And that's why I love this plant, is because it is so safe. I remember listening to something on Leafly. I think it was one of the actual producers of one of these opiates. And he had stepped down, he stepped away from the company, and he said, if there's any plant in the whole wide world that I would use on any of my clients that is 100% safe and non-lethal, he made the point to say that this is the only plant that is non-lethal would be cannabis. And so, as we both know, there's more people that die from peanut butter than there are cannabis. And so this whole stigma, I believe that as we get further with research and we turn to these leadership heads, that will kind of die away, because people will see the true intelligence behind this plant combined with our man can only have this intelligence to then take these different products and put them together. One thing about terpenes, and I think, you know, in, again, Minnesota, a non-THC state. So Blue Kush, or all these different random names that we had named all these things years back, that kind of creates some intimidation, I think, for many people when they go into a dispensary. Are those terpenes, or are they chemotypes and cannabinoid mixtures? Which are they?
So referring to the strain name or the
Strain
name
name.
of the name of the variety, it is really just a marketing tool.
Okay.
It was designed to create more excitement when you go to purchase something. If we were naming these things scientifically, they would be named based on their specific genetic sequence, and they would get a name like H1V5 subtype 2. That's not sexy or cool.
It's like their UPC code.
Exactly, exactly. Nobody really wants to buy that. But if you name it mimosa kush or orange haze or
Right.
super silver candy, yummy, whatever,
Yeah.
it creates more of an allure, right?
Yeah.
Really, what you should be looking towards or beyond, you should be looking beyond that strain name and instead look to the cannabinoid and terpene mixture, which is the chemotype, to help you better determine the experience that that's going to produce, because you're not consuming the name. Instead, you are consuming the actual compounds that then will interact with your body to produce the effect.
Yep. Awesome. Love that. So these UPC codes, which we have named mimosa, have a different effect on the body. And there can be different effects on the body when you're taking cannabis and CBD. And you have already mentioned the onslaught of snake oil on the market. Also have to keep in mind, if you're buying it at GNC or some of these other places, it is a mass market product. And so, it's kind of like going to a functional medicine practitioner and getting something that's only sold to functional medicine practitioners because it's made for professionals by professionals to sell from a professional, versus going on and just kind of like, yeah, well, it's at GNC. I'm here. I'm going to pick it up. Okay. So we're all different kinds of consumers, but please keep in mind, if you're not having an effect or feeling anything, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that cannabis doesn't work, or it doesn't mean that you didn't take enough, because I feel as though people are overdosing, and our products to bounce off of that are 300, 1000 CBD, CBG. All of my practitioners that sell our products, they muscle test on our products, and they can see all of these multi-level marketing products come in. They can see everything from the co-ops coming in, and they need a fraction of our products compared to these mass market products. So I just want to throw that out there, is the efficacy of what's in the product and side effects. Side effects can be, and I want you to talk into this, because side effects can come from maybe a dirty product, whether it's remedial plants pulling in toxins or things of that nature. It could also be the blend, so we're talking and we're getting excited about artisan products, but sometimes terpenes can have a competitive value. So if you're putting like uppers and downers together, or, you may take something that has too much linalool in it and you get tired and you're like, oh, cannabis makes me tired, or CBD, it made me tired. Like, you have to be more introspective as far as what you're taking and what kind of reaction you're having. And then maybe you can talk about different reactions that people have and just maybe some insight and takeaway on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a really important thing. One, I think that it's so frustrating from my perspective to have these more snake oil elixirs on the market, because it does create that, ooh, cannabis is not for me. And when we talk about a cannabis overdose, so most everybody is overdosing on cannabis, meaning that like the therapeutic or the value that it takes for cannabinoids and terpenes to have a therapeutic action is like minuscule,
Right.
like micrograms. And so we're consuming in milligrams. And so we're already technically overdosing our body. But a cannabis overdose is really safe. There's nothing really that's going to be harmful about that, except if you are incorporating THC, where there you
Right.
get anxiety, paranoia,
Right.
etc. Also, terpenes, they are incredibly concentrated molecules. And so you only need a very, very little bit of them. And most of our research that we do have around terpenes are around smelling them. They're the aromatic compounds. They exist in most all plants. You smell them, you get a certain effect. There is not much research that looks to terpenes when they're heated and inhaled. And some research that we do have actually points to the ability of those terpenes to turn into one of the most toxic compounds on the market, benzene, which is a carcinogen. It can cause cancer. And so this also necessitates an investigation into, well, how is the company including more terpenes in their product? Is it from cannabis? Are they cannabis derived? Are they sourced from plants? Or are they including artificial terpenes in there, synthetic terpenes? That is not good. You do not want a product that has that strain name, that code bubblegum, to taste like bubblegum. That means that the company is putting in something that is artificial, that especially if heated or inhaled will not be good news for you?
Yeah. So halt right there, because this is really, really, really important. People buy products based on, they like to taste things that are good. And if you're buying a whole plant, if you're buying even our broad spectrum minor cannabinoids, in the extraction process, and you can speak into this as much as you want, when you're doing these supercritical or subcritical processes, you're extracting out the terpenes, and then we reterp them in. Okay, so companies will add back in terpenes to what you're saying of all different value states. You can use terpenes on the market that are USP food grade to the highest grade, and put those in. You can use them from what you took out from your extraction and put them back in. And then you can take the synthetic ones. So if you're buying something off the internet that is a CBD or a THC product and it's like blueberry, is it blueberry? Do I really want blueberry CBD? Because I don't think I do. So that goes back to understand the profiling of terpenes. And, I have a really strong passion for terpenes and the power of them. And I agree. It's just like, Young Living, they brought terpenes, which essential oils, to the whole entire world. And now we have all these essential oil companies with all these different grades of excellence. So the same thing goes for cannabis. The terpenes that are pulled from the cannabis, or the USP food grade ones that are put into cannabis. All great, well and dandy, where you and I get excited about the artisan formulations. But again, this product is expensive. To make it is really expensive. And if you're buying a product that has a really yummy taste to it and it's really cheap, it's probably a really cheap formula.
Exactly. And will not be good for you. And that's
Right.
where, if you are consuming, especially a CBD product, which most people are consuming CBD to get some kind of symptom relief or to get some help in management of ailment or illness, you do not want to be inundating your system with more toxic compounds, right? And so, as you mentioned, my preference in formulation is when you are pulling out your terpenes from cannabis in your extraction process and then reintegrating them back in at the end. The ensemble effect, I mean, the reason why it works is not because you're Frankensteining all these different compounds together from many different places. It is the unique fingerprint of that plant material. And so the way that you then maximize that efficacy in your end product is by removing the terpenes at the beginning of the extraction from that plant material and reintegrating them back in.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's just good to know how it gets back into the bottle, and just the level of care that it takes. I mean, I'm playing with Oregon, company from Oregon, incredible company from Oregon that we have a relationship from here in Minnesota. We're playing around with raw terps. And so we're playing around with THCA, which is very, very high anti-inflammatory, and CBG, and all these different raw terps with CBD, but then combining them with some different, primrose oil and some things of that for a delivery system, and just kind of what kind of benefit they can have. So each part can be handled with care. And, we just have to really think about, okay, how did we extract it out? And then how do we carefully get it back in so the rancidity is low, there's no heat that, defines reducing the product. Even the safety of the COA. I mean, we've caught companies going in and whiting out COAs and then putting other information on the COA. So, again, do your research. I think it's really, really important. Thank you for all of that. The last subject I wanted to just touch on, because we are two women standing here, and the Awaken Beauty podcast loves men, but we empower women. And when it comes to cannabis and CBD and women, the research is continuing to be done. And I know Israel is kind of leading the research within women in cannabis. Women suffer more pain, have more issues with sleep, have more issues with immune disorders than men. And so I find that this female plant product is really an abundant gift to women. Can you speak a little bit more into how it helps the endocrine system, our hormones in women specifically, both from your experience as a bud tender to what you know as science?
Absolutely. So I will echo just the excitement that I have that this female medicinal plant can be such a tool and be used to empower women in the black market, in the illicit market. Cannabis was really characterized by a stoner kind of bro masculine culture, and seeing the movement into the legal market is so exciting because it allows access for demographics like women, moms, grandmothers who never had access before. So that is one amazing. The ECS does interact very heavily with the endocrine system. And so our hormone fluctuations will absolutely then trigger different fluctuations in the ECS. An example of that even is women who are on contraceptives versus women who are not will have different endocannabinoid tone more generally. Of course, everybody has their own unique endocannabinoid tone, but even being on contraceptives and having that influence in your hormone regulation will absolutely influence your ECS. Also, there is research that shows that there is a sex difference when it comes to the receptor availability in our ECS. And so women have lower CB1 receptor availability than males. And CB1 receptor availability correlates to endocannabinoid system drive. So how much your endocannabinoid system is working, how many endogenous cannabinoids is it pumping out to then occupy those CB1 receptor spots. And so with males having higher CB1 receptor availability, it actually leads us to believe that men have lower ECS drive. So women actually have a higher ECS drive, where our endocannabinoid systems are like working, they are pumping. And that means that in my opinion, that women could benefit even more than men from phytocannabinoid supplementation, and that our systems are already kind of primed to know how to use these cannabinoids in the way that's going to be best for us.
That's really unique. So men have a more abundant CB1 receptor load.
Yes.
That maybe speaks into why they can be so dumb sometimes.
Absolutely. I
Just
mean,
saying.
the fact that their ECS is not working as well as the female sex, that already females have this system, we all have this system inside us, but that women are already doing a better job without supplementation at the onset, which is amazing to me. It's amazing that already our systems are primed to be able to use these phytocannabinoids to the best of their ability for whatever we need them for.
How about pregnancy, breastfeeding, and using CBD and THC while pregnant?
Very taboo topic. I have had a lot of pregnant women who were regular consumers prior to being pregnant reach out to me about this. There is limited amount of research in regards to specifically long-term, like how that fetus will fully develop, right? So there haven't been many long-term studies looking at, okay, this mother who consumed cannabis, now her child is 25 years old. What does he look like? Also, the studies that have been done have looked at populations of women who just like took drugs. And so that was like, and any negative results from that came from, well, the woman was also using cocaine in many cases, or using alcohol during her pregnancy. The research that we've seen with just cannabis and just CBD doesn't show any negative side effects in the fetus. If anything, it shows a stronger immune system, better immunology for both the fetus and the mother. Also, if we're looking at populations of women who have really bad morning sickness, they're using cannabis to help manage their morning sickness. Well, that is so much safer and better for mother and child than the pharmaceutical alternatives that will be prescribed to them. And so, in my opinion, From a scientific perspective, no, we do not have conclusive scientific evidence around almost all of these things, actually, especially when we look at women who are pregnant and breastfeeding. However, the aggregate anecdotal evidence and the emerging scientific data shows and points to its relative safety for both mother and child.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's a fear tactic that's put out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think with like any supplement you buy on the market, it says do not use if you're pregnant.
Right.
Because, well, one, we don't want to put mom and baby at risk. Nobody wants to be reliable on putting
Mm-hmm.
mom or baby at risk. But I
Mm-hmm.
full-heartedly agree with you. I feel like it's an attribute for women to use while pregnant, obviously with moderate use and not overdosing, because,
Mm-hmm.
things can store in fat. And we know that, but also kind of what we started with, there's like this recycling system that's always keeping us in balance. And so our body does that while baby's inside us. And if the first interaction with the endocannabinoid or cannabinoids is when baby drinks from the mother's breasts, and it's the very thing that calms the baby down as the endocannabinoids are coming out of the baby's breast, it's like, how can that,
Exactly. And then it makes sense as to the
Yeah.
safety of supplementing with phytocannabinoids. And I completely agree with you that it is more of a kind of scare tactic. And I mean, there's so much even right now in the country of just like the argument is so overused of like, save the children, save the children.
Yeah.
But really, it can be such benefit to women, especially if they are experiencing discomfort in
Mhm.
their pregnancy. Ultimately, like baby will be the healthiest, in my opinion, if the mom is feeling good and healthy. If she is chronically feeling ill and sick and taking a cocktail of pharmaceuticals to help manage that state, that is going to put the baby at much more risk than consuming cannabis would be. And that's also to say that women don't need to smoke to consume
Right.
anymore. They don't even need to vaporize. I mean, they can consume a tincture or
Yep.
an edible or use it topically.
Yep.
And that will, of course, pose less risk to baby and mother because there's less of those kind of carcinogenic byproducts that just come from smoking, right?
Yeah.
So there are so many different ways that we can interact with this plant. This plant has such a polydynamic nature, meaning it's so much more than just that one singular compound THC. And it can really do so much good with a real low risk level.
Yeah, I agree. And when we think about all these issues with children, it goes back to the mom and the stress value in their gut and the gut brain axis and just the inflammation in the gut makes a really huge impact on baby. So if all of these compounds and what we're talking about have this opposite opposing messaging system in the body to go up versus down and keep pushing stress messaging out and go up and say, calm down, chill out. It's like, if I can get my tummy to calm down and my gut brain access, it's only a benefit for the child. So we could go
Yes.
off for hours on that. I don't have children, probably won't, but all my pregnant mamas, I say, yes, ma'am, you just use your own personal discretion, but I think it's okay. So thank you for that. So I think we can say the same for, hot flashes. We know that cannabis and CBD has a value set on temperature in the body. So that's the way it helps with hot flashes, to inflammation, anti-aging, going back to the hemp seed oil versus actually activated hemp in the product. All of these anti-inflammatory benefits of CBD and THC basically calm the body down, whether it's the mind, gut, pain, it kind of has this universal thing, but what we're talking about are the nuances of it and just the consumer safety and the consumer knowledge that we want to put into our listeners' hands to gather the resources and the information that you've shared with today, which I thank you so much. I just want to kind of leave this kind of open table and just ask if there's anything that you wanted to share today that was on your heart, on your mind. And I always ask guests, what is one thing personally that you've personally awakened to on the Awaken Beauty podcast lately in your own life?
Mm.
It doesn't need to be cannabis related. It can be anything.
Cool. I I, one, would like to say thank you so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure to be able to engage in these conversations, especially with other powerful women. That's one of my favorite things about the cannabis industry is there are so many of us who are leading the charge with education and trying to empower our community to just experiment consciously and responsibly and appropriately with this plant. So thank you for the opportunity to come on here and
Indeed.
share my knowledge. Something that I have awakened to lately, I have been doing a lot of good self-work this year, which I'm really excited about, and that cannabis has been so helpful in that. And one of the main things that I've gotten down is moving my body for joy rather than for a certain motivation of vanity or general body ideal that is purported by the media. And it feels so good to finally find that joy and consistent, sustainable movement for myself, and has absolutely helped to influence my mental health so positively. Of course, my physical health, but really more so my mental health. So that was a kind of aha awaken moment for me the last few months, which I'm forever grateful for.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think it's kind of unique because one, it's energy. Movement is energy. And actually, as you're moving and you're in joy, it taps into your anandamide, your bliss molecule. So, and we can go off for another half hour on how you don't need cannabis to activate your bliss molecule. You can just move, like Emma just said that she is so enjoyably doing this year to help her stress levels. I'm sure, girl, you are a busy, busy woman. And you have your educational portal, you are educating, you are consulting with companies. What is the future for you moving forward? Your consulting company, you and any partners, what does that look for you? And then we can kind of end with where we can find you.
Sure. So my company is Eminent Consulting. I have been an educator and consultant in this space for the last 3 years now, been in the industry for almost 4, but really took the leap and created this company with my business partner. And it has been so much fun helping to influence the emerging markets out there. Specifically, we're doing a lot of work in Missouri and Oklahoma, where if we can plant this craft ethos and scientifically minded education and exploration of cannabis, those are the places that I want to do it, because I feel like they really need it the most. Also, big proponent of education and training, specifically for the bud tender population. And so we do right now have workshops that are online that help people understand the fundamentals of cannabis science, products, consumption, how they relate to bioavailability, as well as really the finesse of speaking about cannabis to people who are interested. So empathetic patient care, consultative sales. We're in a huge revamp of that program, and actually are going to be most likely building out our own learning management system. So that's a huge internal project for us right now that I'm really excited to hopefully see that come to full fruition in the fall. And then we want to take it to as many markets as possible and really begin advocating for some better standardized, comprehensive training and education, really industry-wide, but specifically my population that I'm super passionate about is educating these bud tenders who are on the front line, who are interfacing with people who cannot get information from their doctors. And they're also representing an entire industry behind them. So to not have any kind of training is inexcusable. And we really want to be the premier training for all the different states, and then hopefully when federal legalization goes, looking at federal as well.
I think that's great. And I really, I respect the roots that you've planted in the ground, and specifically to bud tenders, because there's so much abundance in this industry, but really it comes to human connectivity. And when humans walk into a space and people from Minnesota venture to Colorado or somewhere else, they're bringing back items and they're trying to get educated, but they're still coming back confused. And that's their first touch point out of reading everybody's copy and paste information on websites on the internet. And to have that connectivity with the human in which you're educating these bud tenders and have that really A+ material for them, it's always the process, and websites and systems and CMS systems are always a process. And it's a lot of copy and content, but kudos to you to getting actually out there and giving them that one-to-one value time and helping one-to-one humans get back in touch with this responsibility of this incredible plant. So that's great. So we can find you where, my dear?
Yes. So find me on most of the platforms. Instagram is a huge one for me. So my personal handle is at @echasen. Then my company is at Eminent Consulting. You can also find us at www.eminentconsultingfirm.com, where you can find links to our online workshops if you would like to take them.
Awesome. Well, I hope you make it to Minnesota someday.
Me too.
Missouri, get to the M of Minnesota, please. I would say we're probably about 2 years behind here. And so we're really trying to up the ante and really get kind of a groundswell. And I hope to be a part of that and representing Elementa and some other organizations. But props to you, girl. I'm sure hopefully we can have you on again sometime if you would be willing to come back.
I would love that.
Awesome. Well, I thank you for your time today and your grace and all of your leadership in the industry and woman to woman. Thank you very, very much for everything that you bring to the table. And Awaken Beauty listeners, thank you for listening to the Awaken Beauty podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And I don't want you to just leave a 5-star, but actually leave a comment of what you actually captured, that insight that you captured from Emma and I's conversation today, so that you can help bridge to other women. Also, if you're interested in high quality cannabis and CBD products, go to evoquebeauty.com, evoqbeauty.com. You'll find everything there you need. Reach out if you have any questions. And again, thank you for your time today.